wouldn't find this book in the Western section among the others. It wouldn't fit to the same degree. It's more complex than that.
Yeah, I think complex is the perfect word for it. Like most Westerns are kind of like tropey,
Yeah.
thematically similar, like just lots of stereotypes. And I think McCarthy, he does a great job of avoiding those. Like, of course, there's cowboys, they're saying partner and stuff like that, but even that, I noticed like he doesn't say howdy partner, like PARTNER. He says howdy partner, PARDNER. So I think he does whatever he can to just kind of step away from those cliches
Yeah,
while still.
I think what he's doing is these characters believe in the idea of the Western, right? They want to go be cowboys. They have that dream. There's that romanticism that is aligned alongside with their idea of Western. When in reality, what actually happens to them, it's never as neat as they would have wanted. So even when they go about saying partner and
Great
I can
point.
get used to a cowboy's life and so on, the reality of their situation, it just doesn't translate to the dream that they had of what it would be.
That's a great point. I mean, it is sort of like a microcosm of what we think he's kind of arguing or when he writes this. Like,
Yes.
so John Grady Cole is the lead, and there's Lacey Rollins is like his best buddy. Like, I think they're technically cousins or something, but they're just like, they grew up together. They've done everything, and they just decide. And I actually missed this. Did they there was someone alluded to that they were in trouble, like they were running away from the law to go to Mexico, but I never actually thought that was true. It was more just
people think that because why would these two Americans think that they should go off to Mexico? So everybody's assumption is they're running from something, but in reality, what they're running from, it seems like for John Grady, he's had this ranch in his family forever, and the ranch is about to be sold. And this life that he envisions for himself as a cowboy is about to slip through his fingers, and he's going to have to move back into town. And for Rollins, I think it's less of there's an impetus for him to leave and go be a cowboy, but there's nothing keeping him in town either. And he feels this loyalty and this sense of adventure. And in a very, idealistic and optimistic way, they decide, what if we leave and go off to Mexico to be cowboys?
Yeah, so that plays exactly straight into like the classic Mexican Western. I guess they're more not Mexico, it's more like Texas. But then they leave Texas, and that's exactly when the story it diverges from the classic sort of yeehaw gunslinging tropes. So how did you feel about like the characterization of Texas versus Mexico, like the land in Mexico, and what do you think, like John Grady Cole and Lacey Rollins, do they get what they expect? What do they expect out of that trip?
Yeah, I think for them and in United States history, the West has always been this place where you can go test your manhood, make a lot of money, push the boundaries. The negative sides of that, right? The massacre of so many Native Americans, the death and toil, that hasn't been talked about to the same degree until more recently, relatively. And, in their minds, they're imagining a West of folklore as Mexico, this place where civilization hasn't touched it to the same degree. I think what they're seeing already in Texas is that time and age of the cowboy is coming to an end. But they hope that in Mexico, this lawless land where that life might still exist, that they hope that they can take a part in that. So I think what we'll find is in the beginning of their journey, there is some of that. In fact, Rollins remarks as they're riding towards Mexico, I could get used to this life. And then, it doesn't take very long for them to start getting into trouble and realizing that it's not all fun and games. And just because in a cowboy novel, you can have a shootout and everybody will end up okay. In this novel, there are real consequences, and Mexico isn't necessarily this dreamland for cowboys, but rather a harsh reality where a lot of negative things can happen to people who aren't prepared and who didn't necessarily prepare themselves for inevitable sufferings.
So what happens? So like early on in the novel, they leave Texas, they cross the Rio Grande. I don't think he actually ever even says the Rio Grande. I think they just cross the river.
Yeah.
Again, because that would be too tropey, like Rio Grande. So they cross Rio Grande, they get into Mexico. I think a family, just like a random Mexican family, they like pull up to their house, and this family is like, yeah, come eat dinner with us, that sort of thing. They get taken in, which is, I mean, that's something we could talk about, the Mexican values versus, if there's any commentary, Mexican values versus American values. So maybe put a button on that and you can comment. But what happens immediately after? Like, what's the first trouble they get in? Do they
Well,
meet
they
Blevins
encounter
and then
Blevins. Yeah. So
yeah.
everything is going well. They encounter Blevins. Blevins is this, he says he's 16. He looks closer to 13. He is raggedy, runaway, just totally disheveled. And yet he's riding this terrific horse, this horse that no runaway could possibly running. So immediately Rollins, and for that matter, I'm sure John Grady, are suspicious, thinking, how did this guy get this horse? Blevins is insistent that it's his horse. He more or less follows them, and eventually John Grady Cole convinces Rollins, fuck it, let's just let this guy ride with us. It's okay. And they end up encountering a thunderstorm. Blevins, he's 13, is terrified of thunder and lightning. He says he's been struck before, his whole family's cursed. So he gets off his horse, he strips all of his clothes off, and of course the horse runs away to a small town. So that's their first piece of trouble. Blevins says, I need to go get my horse back. I need to get my gun back, which is with the horse. They go into the town, they Blevins steals the horse and the gun back. Rollins and Grady are implicated and just caught up in the mess. And the three of them are running away, rather riding away with people chasing after them. So the people pursuing them, they end up going after Blevins, and John Grady and Rollins split off on another side. And for a while, that's the last we hear of Blevins. But that was kind of their first dose that things are a little bit tougher here than we might think.
And Blevins is a very eccentric character. Like they wager about he says he's like the best shot. This might be in reference to something else. No, it's not the same.
No, you got it.
Quote.
Yeah.
Well, no, but there's a quote, and he was like, they're talking about he's a good rider. And then Rollins like, no, John Grady Cole is the best rider. And then I think Blevins makes a comment, it's like, he's the best. And Lacey Rollins is just like, there's lots of good riders, but there's only one rider who's the best. And I thought that was great. That was a great line. He has a couple really good one-liners in here. Like another one sorry, I'm going off on a little tangent, but you made me think of it. John Grady Cole, so his family's like ranchers. And the way they describe, this is a beautiful way to describe someone without actually saying they're wild. He says the Coles are, the only thing they're afraid of is dying in bed.
Yeah.